Hello, class. This week I wanted to talk to you about value. Value is a term in art used to describe the lightness or darkness of something. And last week I actually had you guys make value scales out of your materials to see how dark those materials could go. And value is one of the most important things for you to keep in mind in this course. One of the most common mistakes of my drawing students is that they will not match the darkness of their subject. And it personally took me years before I was able to see the right darkness. So one little trick that you can use until you get more practice at paying attention to things like that is to actually hold up your value scale that you did last week to your subject to check it against your drawing, to check if the darkness is the same. And I promise you that with practice, you will begin to see the values more accurately. We in our culture are not really used to paying attention to the relative lightness or darkness of something in general. So just with practice, it'll get easier. So I want to talk to you first about the idea that value is relative. And what I mean by that is that there's actually no such thing as an objectively existing white or an objectively existing black, that those terms are actually used to describe two ends of a spectrum. And I'll show you what I mean by that in this slide. So what you guys are looking at is a value scale. And so you can see there's the lightest square on the left, and then there's the darkest, the black one on the right. And I want you to look at the black one as I change to the next slide. So as you can see, what was the black square now has become gray relative to the darker square that I've added, which now reads as black next to it. So now I want you to look at the new black square. So now that one is now gray compared to the darker square that I've added as well. And that's what I mean by saying that black and white don't actually exist. They are relative. And a lot of things in an artwork are relative like this. Color, the brightness of a color is only relative to dullness that also exists there. Even when you're describing things like looseness or tightness, if there's an area of the drawing that's more detailed and tighter, that's in comparison to somewhere else in the drawing as well. And this idea of relativity is actually applicable to more than just art. A lot of the things in our world, such as beauty, for example, are relative, that we only consider something beautiful against a frame of reference, a reference point that is what we consider ugly. And so oftentimes I find that artworks function as a microcosm to larger rules of the world. So that is a value. And in the Renaissance, the whole value scale was used for dramatic effect. The point of these narrative paintings were to excite the viewer and to create drama. And back when these paintings were made, they were so impressive to viewers that didn't have things like movies and television, that sometimes viewers would faint when a painting was unveiled because it was so shocking and dramatic and realistic. And the value is really important to achieve that believability and that drama. You can see in this image, if everything was a lot lighter, it would lose a lot of impact. And so you want to really check and police your own drawings that you're going dark enough. Some people happen to go too dark at first, and I'll point out those of you that do that, but most common is people will go too light. And something that people don't really know is to get the materials to go as dark as you need them to go, sometimes you have to press as hard as you possibly can. And that's what I do in my studio. So I've got some other Caravaggio paintings. He's one of my favorite classical painters. And so you can see also that the shadow and light is the best way to describe form to a viewer. And so for your next few exercises, I'm going to have you create shadows on your subjects. And the function of that is so you can bring out the form. So Jesus's six-pack would not be as pronounced and as three-dimensional without the shadows. Another Caravaggio painting. And so modern day television and movies actually use similar lighting to those Caravaggio paintings, a face half in light, half in shadow with some reflected light. And it's funny because these television shows use the lighting for the same reason. It creates a sense of drama and um, to their cinematography. All right, so that is what I wanted to say about value in shadows. And so this leads us to the description of your homework assignment. And so first I want to talk to you about vanitas. Vanitas are still lives, and vanitas are a genre of still life painting that was popular in the Netherlands in the early 17th century. And the point of these paintings was to show to the viewer the ephemeral nature of life, the fragility of life, and the temporary nature of everything. These artists were making these still lives with subjects like skulls and bubbles and flowers to show how fleeting life is and the reality of death and mortality. So everything in a vanita is deeply symbolic, from the species of plant to the type of animals used in the feast scenes. There's whole compendiums that describe the different species of flowers and what their symbolism is in classical art. And the arrangement of how the objects are arranged will oftentimes imply things like death or rebirth or the fragility of life, even just by the juxtaposition of where the objects are placed and oriented. So I'm moving into some more contemporary vanitas. And oftentimes the vanitas will have little insects because the point of it is to show sort of the decay and the temporary transient nature of everything. And a still life is described as a subject matter containing mostly or all inanimate objects. So here are some contemporary vanitas. You can see this one has a high heel shoe. All right, so your homework this week is to draw your own vanita, basically, but it doesn't necessarily have to deal with the impermanence of life and all of that. But what I want you to take away from the examples of the vanitas is how symbolic everything is. That's what I want you to pull from those images of vanitas. Your homework this week is to create a self-portrait using objects. And so I want you to pick at least 3 objects that you feature in a drawing that tell me about who you are, or something about you, or what you care about, or your life, and the rest of the class as well. This is an example of a student drawing from this assignment. And so I have very specific instructions in the weekly assignment document. So make sure that you read it carefully. I want you to light your objects very specifically to create half light, half shadow on them, just like the Caravaggio paintings and a lot of those still lives that I showed. This one is a good example of the dramatic lighting I want you to create. You should be using the full value scale, so set everything up so that way there are parts that are very light, there are parts that are very dark. You should start thinking about how to compose the values and arrange your objects. One tip is the larger the objects are in your drawing, the more room you have for detail. So this student really zoomed in a little bit more. This student zoomed out quite a bit, and you can see it's a very different effect. Consider what the background is going to be. This one's on cloth. This one has a neutral background, and this one is on a shelf that seems to be depicted, or the edge of a table. And so just think about what kind of a narrative you could imply or suggest by not only what the objects are, but how you've arranged them, how you've lit it, and how you've chosen to draw it as well. So this last slide is a still life and a vanita that I actually did when I was in high school. So that is all for the description. You are to use one full sheet of the white paper. The white paper is for homework drawings, just to remind you, and the newsprint is for classwork unless I specify otherwise. So in order to get the darkness that I'm asking for in this drawing, you're going to need to use the compressed charcoal, and using the white charcoal is probably a good idea as well. Be careful to keep the white Conti clean, or else it'll start to get muddy when it starts mixing with the charcoal. I'd also recommend that you start out maybe with the soft charcoal, so that way the lines, the preliminary lines when you're trying to draw your objects first, aren't like pressed so deep into the page that you won't be able to erase them. That will happen if you start with the compressed charcoal. So thank you.